The pencil shouldn't have mattered. Just a splintered piece of wood and graphite worth maybe 2 cents left behind in the chaos of twisted metal and blood. But for Vivian Ashford, lying in a hospital bed with fractured ribs and a concussion that made the world swim in and out of focus, that pencil was everything. It was the only thread connecting her to the man who had pulled her from death's grip and vanished like smoke into the Pennsylvania fog. She had built a billion-dollar empire on one simple principle: never leave a debt unpaid. And she owed this stranger her entire life. The problem was, he didn't want to be found. But Vivian Ashford had never taken no for an answer. 3 weeks earlier, on a Saturday morning in mid-October, Everett Callahan was thinking about pancakes. Not the fancy kind with berries and whipped cream that his son Sawyer kept seeing on cooking shows at the library. Just simple buttermilk pancakes with the maple syrup he had been rationing since September. Money was tight. Money was always tight. But Saturdays meant something special for breakfast, even if special just meant using an extra egg. His 1998 Ford pickup groaned along Route 42, cutting through rural Pennsylvania like a gray ribbon through an endless sea of trees. The fog had rolled in thick overnight, clinging to the hollows and valleys, turning the familiar landscape into something ghostly and strange. Visibility was maybe 20 feet, and Everett kept his speed cautious, his hands steady on the wheel. Sawyer sat in the passenger seat, 8 years old, all knobby knees and curious eyes. His jacket was 2 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from the church donation box that swallowed his small frame. He was tracing patterns in the condensation on the window, his breath fogging the glass. The boy looked up at his father with that mix of hope and mischief that only children can manage. He asked if his dad could get the radio working. Everett adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his calloused hands rough from years of engine grease and honest labor. The radio had been dead for 3 months. They both knew that, but he offered to hum something instead. Sawyer's face scrunched up with gentle honesty. He told his father that maybe humming was not the best idea, that he sounded like a sick moose when he tried to sing. Everett laughed, the sound filling the truck's cramped interior with unexpected warmth. His wife used to say the same thing. The mention of Elise settled between them like it always did. Not heavy anymore, just present. A third passenger they had learned to make room for. She had been gone 2 years now, taken by cancer that had eaten through their savings before it ate through her body. 18 months of fighting, 18 months of hope and hospital bills, and watching the strongest woman he had ever known grow weaker by the day. She had died in December 2 years ago, with Everett holding one hand and Sawyer holding the other. The fog grew thicker as they rounded the bend near the old Hutchinson place, abandoned since the foreclosure 3 years back. Everett slowed the truck even more, his headlights cutting weak tunnels through the gray. This was black ice weather, the kind that could send you sideways before you even knew the road had gone slick. And then he felt it, a deep wrongness in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then his headlights caught the wreckage. A silver Bentley had wrapped itself around the massive oak tree that had stood sentinel at the road's edge for 100 years. The tree that had survived a century of Pennsylvania winters had won this fight. The car's front end had crumpled like paper, the hood buckled upward, steam rising from what was left of the engine. Glass glittered across the wet pavement like scattered diamonds. Everett slammed on the brakes. His arms shot out instinctively, protectively, pressing against Sawyer's chest even though the boy was buckled in. He told his son to stay in the truck. His voice came out harder than he meant it to, sharpened by fear and adrenaline. But there was no time to soften it. He was already out of the vehicle, boots hitting wet pavement, fog swallowing him whole. The cold bit through his thin flannel shirt like teeth. November air, sharp enough to sting his lungs with every breath. He could hear it now. The tick, tick, tick of hot metal cooling. The hiss of something leaking. And underneath it all, a sound that made his stomach drop. Wet, labored breathing. Someone was alive in there. He reached the driver's side and his breath caught in his chest. Through the shattered window, he could see her. A woman, mid-30s maybe, dark hair matted with blood, slumped against the deflated airbag. Her face was turned toward him, pale as the fog itself. A deep gash ran across her forehead, blood sheeting down the side of her face. For one terrible moment, he thought he was too late. Then her eyes fluttered open. The word came out as barely more than a whisper, bubbling through blood on her lips. Help. Please. Everett was already moving, his hands finding the door handle, pulling with everything he had. The metal groaned, but did not give. The frame had bent on impact, trapping her inside like a steel coffin. Behind him, he heard small footsteps on pavement. Sawyer had disobeyed, had climbed out of the truck despite being told to stay. The boy appeared at his side, pale-faced and terrified, but determined. His small hands gripped the door's edge above where his father's hands were already straining. On three, Everett said. 1, 2, 3. They pulled together, Sawyer's slight strength adding to his father's desperate effort. Something in the twisted frame gave way with a screech of metal. The door opened maybe 8 inches. Not enough to pull her through, but enough to reach inside. Everett's hands moved with careful urgency, checking her neck, her spine. His knowledge came from a first aid course he had taken years ago when Elise was pregnant. Back when the future seemed full of nothing but promise. No obvious spinal injury, but she was cold. Too cold. Going into shock. Her left arm was bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. The woman's eyes struggled to focus on him. Different sizes, her pupils. Concussion for sure. Maybe worse. She tried to speak, tried to tell him she could not feel her legs. Everett kept his voice steady even as his heart pounded against his ribs. He told her it might just be how she was positioned, that they were going to get her out. That help was coming. He sent Sawyer running. 2 miles to the Martin house, the one with the mean dog that was hopefully tied up. 2 miles for an 8-year-old to sprint through fog and fear to save a stranger's life. The boy took off without hesitation, his small form disappearing into the gray. Then Everett was alone with the dying woman. He could not get her out. The door would not open wider, and moving her wrong could kill her faster than the cold. So he did the only thing he could. He stripped off his flannel shirt, leaving himself in just a thin undershirt, and worked the fabric through the gap to wrap around her shoulders. The November air immediately bit into his skin, but he barely noticed. Then he reached in and found her hand. Her fingers were ice, delicate, nothing like his own scarred and oil-stained hands. But he held on anyway. She asked him why he was helping her. The answer came without thought, without calculation, because she needed help. That was enough. So he talked to keep her conscious. He told her about Sawyer, about how the kid could draw anything he saw, had a gift for it that seemed to come from somewhere magical. He told her about the Mustang he was restoring in the garage behind their house, his father's car, the one he was fixing up panel by panel whenever he could scrape together money for parts. He told her about the diner in town with the best apple pie in 3 counties, about the deer that came through his yard every evening at dusk, about the way the creek behind his house sounded when it rained. He talked and held her hand and prayed to a God he was not sure was listening. She asked his name. Everett, he told her. And what was hers? Charlotte, she whispered. Then her eyes started to close. He squeezed her hand harder. No sleeping, Charlotte. Stay with me. Tell me something. Anything. What were you doing out here so early? She was supposed to be at a meeting, she managed. Philadelphia. Running late. Drove too fast. Could not see the turn in the fog. That was the last thing she said before the sirens finally cut through the gray. Red and blue lights painting the trees. Paramedics swarming the scene with practiced efficiency. Everett stepped back to give them room. They had tools he did not have, knowledge he did not have, equipment that could actually save her. He was suddenly aware of how useless he had been, how little he had actually done, except hold a dying woman's hand and tell her stories about his ordinary life. One of the EMTs noticed him standing there in his undershirt, his lips turning blue from the cold. She wrapped an emergency blanket around his shoulders and asked if he was injured. He was not. He was fine. He just needed to wait for his son. The sheriff brought Sawyer back a few minutes later. The boy had made it to the Martins, had banged on the door until someone answered, had delivered his message like the brave soldier he was. He crashed into his father's chest with enough force to make Everett grunt. Through the ambulance's open doors, they watched them working on the woman, stabilizing her neck, loading her onto a backboard. She looked small beneath all the equipment, fragile, completely unlike someone who probably owned a car worth more than Everett's house. The sheriff offered them a ride to the hospital to get checked out. Everett declined. Hospitals cost money he did not have, insurance he could not afford, and there was nothing wrong with him that hot coffee and dry clothes would not fix. The ambulance carrying the woman pulled away, sirens wailing, lights disappearing into the fog. And Everett had a strange, dislocating feeling that he had just witnessed something important. A hinge moment where one path split into two. But that was just the cold talking, making him melodramatic. He guided Sawyer back to the truck, cranked the heat as high as it would go. As they climbed in, something caught his eye in the footwell. A pencil. Yellow, wooden, the cheap kind he used for marking measurements in the garage. It must have fallen from his shirt pocket when he leaned into the wreck. He almost left it there. Just a pencil, worth nothing. But something made him pick it up instead, tuck it into his jeans pocket where it pressed against his thigh like a talisman. Evidence that the last hour had been real, that he had been there, that somewhere a woman he would never see again was still breathing because he had stopped. Sawyer asked if the lady would be okay. Everett told him he did not know. He hoped so. Sawyer said she had sad eyes, and Everett agreed, because she did. Sad eyes and a fog-pale face. He wondered what kind of sadness a woman who drove a car like that could possibly carry. Then he drove home and made pancakes. Sawyer drowned them in the last of the maple syrup, and the day continued as days do, 1 minute folding into the next. By evening, the morning's drama had taken on the quality of something that happened to someone else. Everett did not think about the woman, did not wonder if she survived. He had a life to live, bills to pay, a son to raise. The pencil stayed in his pocket, and by the next morning he had forgotten it was there. Vivian Ashford woke up 17 times before she actually woke up. The first 16 were fragments, white ceiling tiles swimming in and out of focus, the mechanical whisper of machines keeping her alive, pain that existed everywhere and nowhere, held at bay by whatever they were pumping into her IV. Her brother James flying in from London, her assistant Julian hovering with worry cracking his usually composed face. The 17th time, her mind was finally clear. The pain had consolidated, become specific. Her left arm throbbed in its cast. Her ribs screamed with every breath. Her head felt like someone had used it for target practice. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. 3 weeks. She had lost 3 weeks of her life to the fog between consciousness and oblivion. But she remembered fragments, a man's voice, steady and warm, telling her she was going to be okay, telling her about his son who could draw, about a car he was fixing, about apple pie and deer at dusk. She remembered the feeling of his hand holding hers, calloused, strong, the only warm thing in a world gone cold, and a name, Everett. When she asked the nurse about the man who saved her, the woman's expression became careful. The paramedics had found her alone, she said. A young boy had run 2 miles to get help, but there was no man at the scene when they arrived. Vivian insisted she was not imagining it. He was real. His name was Everett. He had given her his shirt. The nurse left and returned with a plastic hospital bag. Inside was a flannel shirt, cut up the back where the ER staff had removed it, stained with blood and dirt. Old and worn soft from years of washing, with a patch on one elbow sewn on by hand. Crooked stitches but functional, and in the front pocket something hard and cylindrical. A yellow pencil, basic wooden, the kind you would buy in a pack of 20 at any hardware store. Vivian held it in her fingers and felt certainty settle into her bones. This was real. He was real, and she was going to find him. She hired a private investigator named Vera Castellano within a week of leaving the hospital. The woman was direct and no nonsense. When Vera asked what Vivian wanted with this man, she said she wanted to thank him. Vera pointed out that people did not hire private investigators to say thank you. They sent fruit baskets. Vivian told her she was not a fruit basket kind of person. The file arrived within a week. Everett Callahan, 36 years old, widowed, one son named Sawyer, 8 years old. Worked at Garrett's Auto Repair in a small town called Briarwood. Lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on Maple Street. His wife Elise had died of ovarian cancer 2 years prior, in December. The medical bills had devastated them. He was drowning in debt, barely keeping his head above water, working 60-hour weeks just to hold onto a house that was mortgaged to the breaking point. There were photos. Everett at his son's school helping with a science fair. Everett at the garage, grease-stained and smiling. Everett and Sawyer at the grocery store, the boy riding in the cart despite being too old for it, both of them laughing. He looked happy, not wealthy, not powerful, not any of the things Vivian had spent her life chasing, just happy. When had she last felt that way? She told Julian she was going to find Everett and thank him properly. Her assistant, who had known her for 8 years, asked what she was really planning, and Vivian admitted the truth. If she showed up as herself, as Vivian Ashford, billionaire, CEO of Ashford Industries, all he would see was the money. Everyone always saw the money. But Everett had held her hand when she was dying, without knowing who she was. He had just seen a woman who needed help. She wanted to know if anyone would ever look at her that way again. So she was going to become someone else. 2 weeks later, a woman named Mira Holloway drove into Briarwood, Pennsylvania, in a used Honda Civic with a tire that was mysteriously low on air. The transformation had been meticulous. Vivian had cut her hair shorter, traded her designer wardrobe for jeans and sweaters from Target, learned to drive the Civic until the handling felt natural. Mira Holloway was a graphic designer from Ohio, recently divorced, driving cross-country to clear her head. Briarwood was everything she expected and nothing like anywhere she had ever been. Main Street lined with brick storefronts, a church with a white steeple, a diner called Rosie's with a parking lot full of pickup trucks. People who actually stopped to say hello to each other. She found Garrett's Auto Repair on a side street just off Main, sat in her car for 5 full minutes before she could make herself get out. Everett emerged from under a Suburban when old Garrett called out that there was a customer, wiped his hands on a rag, looked at her with polite professional interest and absolutely no recognition. He introduced himself and welcomed her to Briarwood, said she had just become the most interesting thing that happened all week. She told him that was a low bar. He said she would be surprised. Last week's excitement was Mrs. Patterson's cat getting stuck in her attic. And just like that, standing in a parking lot that smelled of motor oil and autumn leaves, Vivian felt something she had not felt in years. She felt seen, not as a portfolio or a business opportunity, just as a person. He checked her tire, filled it with air, refused payment. She asked if she could buy him lunch instead. They walked to Rosie's, ordered burgers. He talked about his life with an openness that startled her, about losing Elise, about learning to braid Sawyer's hair, about being both parents at once and feeling like he was failing at both. She listened, really listened, not calculating angles, just absorbing his words. He said she was easy to talk to, that most people, when they heard widower and single dad, either pitied him or ran, but she just listened. A few days later, Vivian was waiting at the garage while Everett finished with a customer. She could hear old Garrett talking to someone in the office, his voice carrying through the thin walls. He was saying that Everett was in trouble, real trouble. The medical bills from Elise's treatment had piled up like a mountain. The boy had sold everything his father left him, even the parts for that Mustang he had been restoring since he was 20. The house was mortgaged to the limit. One bad month and he would lose everything. Vivian stood frozen, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. The man who had given her his shirt, who had held her hand while she was dying, was drowning, and she had more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. That night she made a decision that would haunt her later. She called Julian and arranged for Everett's mortgage to be paid off anonymously. She told herself it was the right thing to do. She told herself he would never have to know. She was wrong on both counts. She met Sawyer at the fall festival that weekend. The boy studied her with frank assessment, then asked if she was his dad's girlfriend. Everett's face went red, but Sawyer was undeterred. He pointed out that his dad had said she was pretty and that his dad had been weird all morning. He only got weird when he liked someone. The boy had a sketchbook with him. When Vivian asked to see his drawings, his face lit up. He showed her everything, buildings and people and animals. The talent was unmistakable, raw and untrained, but genuine. She asked if he had ever had lessons. He said no, just YouTube and library books. His dad said lessons cost money they did not have. The matter-of-fact way he said it hit her like a physical blow. She told him about Rothko, about how color could hold emotion. That red was not just red. It could be anger or love or the feeling of sunset when you were missing someone. Sawyer thought about this. Then he said that when he drew his mom, he always used yellow because she was like sunshine. Vivian had to excuse herself to find a bathroom where no one could see her cry. Over the following weeks, she fell into a rhythm with them. Dinners at a restaurant in the next town, afternoons at the library, evenings on Everett's porch, talking until the stars came out. And she fell in love with him, not the dramatic, lightning strike love of movies, but something quieter, something that crept in through small moments. One evening, Sawyer said something that stopped her heart. He told her that broken pieces could be put together to make something new, something that was not the same as before, but was still beautiful, maybe even more beautiful. His dad and him were broken pieces. Maybe she was too. Maybe they could all fit together. That night, Everett kissed her for the first time. She should have told him the truth then, but she was terrified. Terrified that the moment she became Vivian Ashford again, everything would change. So she kept lying, kept stealing happiness she knew she did not deserve. And then one Tuesday morning, the world fell apart. She was at Rosie's having breakfast. A customer left a business magazine on the counter. Rosie picked it up, looked at the cover, looked at Vivian. The photograph showed Vivian at a gala. The headline read, "Vivian Ashford, billionaire CEO, vanishes after mysterious accident." Every head in the diner turned. 30 minutes later, she was standing in the garage parking lot, watching Everett's face turn from confusion to disbelief to something much worse. He asked if it was true, if she was Vivian Ashford, the woman he had pulled from the Bentley. She said yes. His voice was quiet, controlled, more frightening than screaming. He asked what there was to explain, that she had lied for 3 weeks, that she had let his son get attached to someone who did not exist. She tried to tell him that what she felt was real, but he said he had no way of knowing what was real. She had lied about everything. She was fake. He was the real one. Then he told her to go back to Pittsburgh, back to her billions. They were done. He walked away. The garage door closed behind him. Vivian stood alone in the parking lot, the pencil still in her pocket, understanding that she had destroyed the only real thing she had ever had. The penthouse felt like a tomb, 3,000 square feet of marble and glass overlooking Pittsburgh's skyline, every surface gleaming, every piece of furniture precisely placed, and all of it empty. Julian found her there an hour after she returned. He did not say, "I told you so." He just sat and waited. She told him she had ruined everything. He asked what she was going to do about it. And that was when he reminded her about Sawyer's talent, about the scholarship program at the Pittsburgh Institute of Fine Arts for gifted youth from disadvantaged backgrounds. Vivian understood immediately. She contacted her head curator, Margot Delacroix, sent her one of Sawyer's drawings. Margot called back within an hour. The line work was extraordinary. If this was really an 8-year-old's work, they were looking at something special. Vivian arranged for the scholarship, but she set conditions. Her name could not be attached. The selection had to be completely legitimate, based solely on merit. A week later, the committee voted unanimously to offer Sawyer Callahan a full scholarship. She thought that would be the end of it. But then Dominic Hargrove made his move. Dominic was the CFO of Ashford Industries, 45 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He had been with the company for 15 years. What Vivian did not know was that he had been stealing from her for 5 of those years. $23 million. Now that she was back and reviewing finances after her accident, he was getting nervous. When his sources told him she had been in Briarwood, getting close to a mechanic named Callahan, Dominic saw an opportunity. If he could keep her distracted with personal drama, she might not notice his crimes. He drove to Briarwood himself, found Everett at the garage, said he was Vivian's CFO, said he wanted to talk. Everett said he did not want to hear anything about Vivian, but Dominic was persuasive. He mentioned the scholarship Sawyer had received, said Vivian had arranged it, mentioned the mortgage that had been paid off, made it sound like Everett was nothing but a charity project. Everett's face went pale. He had not known about the mortgage. After Dominic left, Everett stood in the garage for a long time. Something did not add up. Why would the CFO of a billion-dollar company drive 3 hours just to tell a mechanic about his ex-girlfriend's charity work? What did Dominic Hargrove gain from making Everett hate Vivian? He thought about the scholarship. He had called the institute himself. Maria Chen had been enthusiastic about Sawyer's talent. She had said the committee voted unanimously. No one had influenced their decision. So either Vivian had arranged the scholarship and the institute was lying, or the scholarship was legitimate and Dominic was lying. And then there was the mortgage. Dominic had known exactly where the money came from. How did he know? Everett called the bank, pushed until they admitted the payment had come from a shell company based in Pittsburgh. A shell company, the kind of thing you used when you wanted to hide where money was coming from, or where it was going. Dominic Hargrove smelled very wrong. That night, Everett called Vivian. His voice was guarded but not ice cold. He asked why Dominic Hargrove had come all the way to Briarwood, what was really going on. And Vivian, exhausted and heartbroken, told him she did not know, but she was going to find out. Julian's investigation took 2 weeks. The trail started with small discrepancies, invoices that did not match, payments to vendors that did not exist, shell companies with no employees. Julian brought in forensic accountants. They concluded that Dominic had stolen $23 million over 5 years. But that was not the worst of it. Julian had also looked into Vivian's accident, hired an independent expert to examine the Bentley. The brake lines had not failed from wear. They had been cut, partially severed in a way that would hold for normal driving, but fail under pressure. Someone had tried to kill her, and Dominic Hargrove had a brother in Pittsburgh, a mechanic who specialized in brake systems. The pieces clicked together. Dominic had known Vivian was planning to review company finances. He had arranged for her to never make it to that meeting. When she survived, he had gone to Briarwood to sabotage her happiness, to keep her too devastated to look at the numbers. Vivian called an emergency shareholder meeting. The boardroom was packed, 150 people. Dominic sat near the front, looking confident. Vivian walked in with two FBI agents. She laid out the evidence, the embezzlement, the shell companies, the falsified reports, $23 million, and then the attempted murder, the brake lines, the brother, the timing. Dominic started to protest. The FBI agent cut him off, read him his rights, snapped on the handcuffs while 150 people watched. As they led him away, Vivian felt no triumph, just exhaustion and hope. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at her office. Inside was a drawing, 3 figures under a tree, the third space outlined in pencil, waiting to be filled, and a note in a child's handwriting. Sawyer wrote that he knew her real name now, that he did not care, that he was not mad about the lying. His dad said people lied when they were scared. He loved her, not because of money, because she listened to him talk about his drawings like he mattered. The drawing was not finished, he wrote. He was waiting for her to come back. There was another letter, from Everett. He said he had been wrong. She had lied about her name, but she had also uncovered the truth about Dominic. She had protected his son's scholarship when she could have claimed credit. The anniversary of Elise's death was coming up, December 21st. He and Sawyer spent it at her grave every year. Sawyer had asked if Vivian could come. Everett did not know if he was ready to forgive, but he knew he had been thinking about her every day. If she wanted to come, they would be at Briarwood Cemetery at 2 o'clock. Vivian canceled everything on her calendar. The cemetery was quiet when she arrived. Gray headstones under gray December sky. She found them at Elise's grave. Everett in his worn jacket. Sawyer holding flowers that looked hand-picked. The boy saw her first. His face lit up and he ran to her. She said she was sorry. For all of it. Everett asked what she wanted, really wanted. And Vivian told him the truth. She wanted him. Him and Sawyer. She wanted Sunday pancakes and terrible diner coffee and walks in the fog. She wanted to help Sawyer develop his talent. She wanted to sit on Everett's porch and talk until the stars came out. She wanted a life that mattered because of the people she loved. Everett said he was still angry, still hurt, still afraid. But he had missed her every day, and he was willing to try. Sawyer pulled them together. He asked if they could all be a family now. And standing beside the grave of the woman who had loved Everett first, he made room in his heart for the woman who would love him next. 6 months later, on a perfect June day, they were married in Everett's backyard under the old oak tree. The guest list was small: old Garrett, Rosie from the diner, Sawyer's teachers from the institute, Julian, who cried more than anyone expected. Sawyer served as best man. He gave a speech about how glad he was to have a stepmom who understood art. Then he got serious. He said his mom used to tell him that love was not about finding a perfect person. It was about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours. His dad was broken when Mom died, he said, and Vivian was broken too. Broken from being lonely. But now they were not broken anymore. They had found each other. Their pieces fit. He looked at Vivian. She had taught him that red was not just red, that colors could hold feelings. So he wanted to tell her something. When he used to draw his family, he used yellow for his mom, because she was sunshine. Now when he drew his family, he used gold for Vivian, because she was treasure. Not the money kind, the real kind. There was not a dry eye in the backyard. Vivian pulled him into a hug and whispered that she loved him. Sawyer hugged her back and said she already deserved it. The drawing from that first package hung in their living room now, completed at last. 3 figures under a tree, and on the bookshelf beside it, in a small glass case, sat a yellow pencil. Just a splintered piece of wood and graphite, worth maybe 2 cents. But it had led a dying woman to the man who saved her life, and it had brought him back to her when everything seemed lost. Sometimes, Vivian thought, the most ordinary things carry the most extraordinary weight. A pencil, a fog-covered road, a stranger's kindness. She had built an empire on never leaving debts unpaid. But this debt, the debt of a life saved and a love found, this one she would spend the rest of her days repaying, not with money, with every sunrise she woke up next to Everett, with every drawing Sawyer showed her, with every ordinary, precious moment of a life finally worth living, and that was worth more than all the billions in the world.